Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ella. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mazi Wabuma has arrived at the destination.
Good afternoon, sir.
I was told you were en route.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. This is such a treasure of a privilege for us to have this conversation this afternoon. And I will formally start in just 1 minute, but just to refresh us, our object is to engage in a way that some of the deep-rooted challenges with decision-making in boardrooms regarding where the company goes within a certain policy cloud, can come out such that a new generation of both decision makers in commercial enterprise and policy makers, and indeed civil society, can get a better sense for what could have been done differently, what exactly happened, and why we have the kinds of outcomes that we have. Central to the approach that we are taking is one that goes back to the tripartite approach to economic development. Several, including one or two amongst us here today, participated in the 1985 Aga Khan Foundation conference in Nairobi, which essentially tried to emphasize a tripartite approach to development, one in which the private sector, the public sector, and the PDAs, as they were then called, social enterprise sector, have a collaboration that is mutually reinforcing, which leads to more effective policy, better corporate strategy, and ultimately growth and development for everybody. I know that a good part of what we will be speaking to will probably how that did not quite work well, how that collaboration that was required did not pan out as desired, and the dire consequences. So I should formally start now by welcoming our very honored panelists. We have Elder Felix Ohiwere. Dr. Ohiwere, of course, was a long, deep player in this ball game, leading for many years as chairman and chief executive, one of the biggest manufacturing concerns in the country, the Nigerian Breweries PLC. His perspective from inside the boardroom, from the management team lead perspective, will definitely be will be invaluable to our conversation. Mazi Samuel Huabunwa has also led, particularly interestingly, both Felix Ohiwere and Mazi Huabunwa led organizations in which there were spectacular policy changes, which I would like to come to. In the case of Nigerian breweries in the malted barley ban. In the case of the pharmaceutical industry, what is famously referred to as the essential drug list policy choice that literally damaged a good part of the investment in the pharmaceutical industry and manufacturing in Nigeria. And then, of course, we have the policymakers who will be joining us and have gone wrong in the decision-making process. Well, let me start by saying that, you know, last session we had most interesting conversation between the panelists amongst all of us. In that conversation, Engineer Joe McCoju made a point that was very important, which is that in these days, countries are not even considered to be developing if they are not contributing more than 12.5% of output GDP from manufacturing. And we all noted, and I made the point that at a point in the history of our country, about the time many of the participants were active, manufacturing actually reached about 13% contribution to GDP. And Nigeria's manufacturing was growing dramatically. And then things went south. They went so south that at some point in time, we had just about 3% contribution to GDP from manufacturing. Now, we clearly are in a very desperate situation with job creation and all of those things that manufacturing bring to the table. And so the first thing that I wanted to engage in is, did we get strategy wrong? I mean, we technically started out with impulse substitution industrialization. Many of the people that invested in manufacturing, who Engineer Charles Ugu, former man president, former minister of industries, spoke to last week, the Adibowales of this world, followed a certain leading on the part of government that pointed to impulse substitution industrialization. Those of us who have part of an academic side to this conversation recall that that was a strategy made very popular by a certain Latin American economist, Raul Prebisch, who led the Economic Commission for Latin America in the late 50s, and went on to UNCTAD and all of that. The Prebisch thesis generally came to be known as the impulse substitution industrialization strategy. And I'll turn to Professor Osito Ogbu, who is not just an academic economist, but has played in an advisory role from the World Bank and other places, and has served as a planning lead in Nigeria, minister in that area. And so, Professor Ogbu, what went wrong in Nigeria? Did we get strategy wrong? When the Asians who started off with us down the track of impulse substitution industrialization turned to export-led manufacturing, why did we get stuck? What went wrong? Huh? Okay. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have you finished posing your question?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak again from where we left off last Sunday. And I think the things I said last Sunday are still relevant for what I will say today. You know, I mentioned to you that we moved from early post-independence from knowledge independence to knowledge dependence. I mentioned that last week. I said we moved from planning to lack of planning. And I said we moved from an industrial policy to no industrial policy. So a combination of all of that will try to answer your question. The import substitution strategy was not a bad strategy. Perhaps the implementation was what went wrong. But if you dig deep into the implementation flaws, you will find that what we are suffering, we are still suffering. The absence of a sense of a nation, the absence of consistency in policy. But what happened was that we threw away the baby with the bathwater rather than take corrective actions. Because let's be honest, we don't know of any nation that has industrialized without certain degree of protection for their industries that are emerging, without a consistent industrial policy that is led from the top. And so you find that we moved from strategy to no strategy. And it came because we drank this, what would I call it? Policy that the free market can do all. The free market is efficient, can allocate resources, can direct resources to the most efficient sectors. Of course, that's not correct. Every nation that has developed, the state has directed in very strong ways the investment pattern, the FDI flows, the policies that guided them. But it looks like not only did we weaken the state, we also abandoned planning and strategy as a whole. So the point is, in a nation as backward as we are, where our per capita income is basically about 10% of a per capita income of the G7 countries, showing the extent of our backwardness, showing the extent of our lack of productivity, there is no way you can have a strategy of complete open market. Let's take China, for example. A lot of people will say, oh, China did well, did this. When they opened up in 1978, things started to happen. Of course, reform is essential. But look at the things that made their reform sustain. One, an efficient bureaucracy, an intelligent bureaucracy, a bureaucracy that is, yes, some element of corruption, but they had a way of dealing with corrupt elements, so it was reduced to a minimum. A leadership that had a vision of its people and where it wants to take the people, a vision of industrialization, an investment in education. You know, last time I made this point, that industrial policy is not a policy of the Ministry of Industry. I made this point last week. An industrial policy affects how you plan for education, the curriculum that you teach. It affects your engineering education, science and technology education. It affects agriculture. It affects science and technology. You have a Minister of Science and Technology that has never been given the teeth to perform the role it's supposed to perform. So even when we have strategies, we keep moving up and down. Recently, we wanted to incentivize the manufacturing of local made cars here, assemblies and so on. But in less than 2 years, we have now reduced import tariff from 35% to 10%. So if you made investments to begin to manufacture cars in Nigeria, how are you going to react? So we keep moving up and down. There is no consistency. We can't take the pains.
What is the problem? How did this change get made like that? Is it that there is no consultative system? Is it that there is limited think power around those who are making these choices? Why do they get made?
Yes, it is because, one, there has to be a plan that is followed to the letter. If you go to Malaysia, I think they are now either in their 13th plan or so. They will tell you exactly what will happen next year, how this airport is going to be expanded, how this one is going to take place. Things are stated clearly, and they have an efficient, intelligent bureaucracy. And they have a political leadership that respects that. But what we have is a political leadership that does not understand that things do not happen, you cause them to happen. You know, everybody that comes says, we want to diversify. And I said, it's not by saying, it's by doing. You take steps to diversify. So there is lack of will, lack of knowledge, lack of capacity, lack of consultation, and staying, you know, sometimes initially it might be painful. Things might not work initially, but you stay the course because you know where you're going and that the outcome is real. The main important point I make is that this, now, you know, when you don't have a sense of nation, when if I want to do something in Ibadan, I have to think of the equivalent in Boronu or the equivalent in Aba, or, you know, rather than support what exists, we are looking for what does not exist. So all of this put together have made our industrialization strategy and steps not to work.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I've answered your question.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to people who will give us specific examples in the course of their leading teams of how some of these uncertainties kept creeping up. But I want you, from a general framework, to hold back for concluding kind of conversation, a look at perspectives of, say, a Frederick List versus Adam Smith in terms of the national view of economic development and Western philosophy in economic thought, and how we have been affected by it in terms of our general philosophy to economic development. We'll come back towards the end to this as part of rounding up. But let me turn to Dr. Hiwere, who led one of the biggest manufacturing concerns in our country during a season when we made a policy choice to ban the importation of malted barley so that we could backwardly integrate, which was the essence of the import substitution industrialization strategy. And then that be made, we changed the policy. Let us invite him to give us a sense from the boardroom when all of those policies were evolving and what they tried to do as business leaders to get policy to run in the direction that would have supported the continued growth of industrialization.
Thank you very much, Pat. I hope you're hearing me.
Yeah, I can hear you, yes.
Yes. Well, the decision by government to ban malted barley came to us with a bang. When that policy decision was taken, and we were given, I think, a period of about 2 years when it would come into effect, in the brewing industry, using maize and sorghum was not a known. So we had to evolve the system. I remember attending a meeting, the policy meeting in Amsterdam, when we considered this matter. And I was just coming in then as managing director. I was asked the question, what do you want? And I said, I wanted for our products, I wanted for Star, Gouda, and Montina, a replica, something that would be would be the same, using local raw materials. In other words, you use local raw materials to produce the type of Star, Gouda, and Montina that existed, so that the consumer will not be able to differentiate. I remember very clearly that the head of technology in Heineken said, Felix, you have asked for a very difficult thing. And I was a hush in the hall for quite a while. And then he got up and said, you have challenged us, we'll take it up. That's how I started. And they were able to come up with a new formula using local raw materials to produce Star, Gouda, and Montina. That was also a replica of what we had in existence before. I don't want to go into details how we did it, but in any case, it was clear that it's not something you could do overnight. So the policy we adopted was to have enough malted barley, and then over a period of time, using local raw materials, phase in the new ingredients that will take the place of barley completely. We succeeded in doing it. So the joy of God succeeded in doing it. And the consumer didn't even know at all when we're using 100% local raw materials. Don't forget that at the same time, the government also said we should backward integrate, which meant that we had to produce our basic local raw materials. And we were forced into having a big maize farm in Bakoji. But let me take the question of the product first. So we succeeded in using local raw materials to produce our brands. And everything was going well. All of a sudden, one evening, one afternoon, somebody rushed into my office and said, have you heard? I said, heard what? That the government has unbanned malted barley. Without any discussion with us, the industry, we just heard that announcement. That came to us as a bank, as the first banning it, came as a bank. So, what did we do with the farming? We said to government we are not farmers. We said to government we are prepared to help farmers to produce in large quantities and in the correct quality. That we rather outgrow these things than do it ourselves. They said, no, we must backward integrate. So we had a big farm, a very big farm in Bakoji. It started very well. What did we find? We were producing maize at a price much higher than the local people were producing maize, because we had to go into all sorts of, the mechanization, that. They had this one. When time came for harvest, our first harvest, and it looked good. By the time we got to halfway in that farm, we found that the villagers had harvested the back of the farm. In spite of the fact that we had a fence around the farm, in spite of the fact that we had security going around, so we could only harvest from about half or even less than half of the area we planted. We were forced into a situation we didn't understand. We were forced into a situation in which we didn't have any expertise. We tried to get the expertise, and the experiment didn't. Now, we went to encourage the outgrowers, and that scheme worked very well. We now got to a stage when we have got to a situation we can now ferment the sorghum and the rest of it, and got everything going at great cost. We had to change the machinery in the brew house. We had to change many other things in the system. And having now achieved a level of success that we were actually happy with and proud of, government without any consultation changed the policy. That was not a good experience. And it's not only in this area of...
How did that change in policy affect planning and decision making when it came?
Yes. It didn't even give us a chance to reap the benefits of the change we brought about in the industry. It was a first in brewing to do what we did in Nigeria. And rather than capitalize on that first, rather than make it something great for the rest of the world to follow or to look at, we changed the policy. That policy change affected not just us, affected the outgrowers, affected everybody. I don't understand how having forced people to encourage local people to get into farming and do it well, and we're helping them with their seedlings and everything. Suddenly, there was a policy somersault. So I think the problem really is.
I'll come back to you, but let me move to Sam, because they suffered this same kind of policy somersault thing, and maybe I'll tell a little story of what happened to the flour milling industry in a similar period, in a similar circumstance, and then we can perhaps turn to Dr. Aribisala, who was a director in the Raw Materials Research and Development Council, set up expressly to facilitate this backward integration into raw materials that were local. And then, of course, he served as permanent secretary in the ministry. So perhaps the pool of our experience can help us put in context how these policy choices were evolving. But let's take the pharmaceutical example first. Sam?
Sir. Yes, sir.
Over to you.
Before I talk, let me greet my senior, Dr. Hewer, because I cannot afford to speak without greeting him. So good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Pat, let's applaud your resilience in gathering us on this discourse to ventilate and maybe do a rehearse. Because if you listen to me and look at me, you see that I'm wearied by long years of discussing the same problem. From 1990, I got into MAN, NECA, and ESG, to today. We're speaking the same thing. And so it's clear to even the uninitiated that there's one singular problem, which Professor Obu has analyzed it and said it's finished. We do not have an efficient and intelligent bureaucracy. We do not have the political leadership that understands the relationship between input and output, relationship between supply and distribution, relationship between wealth creation and poverty, relationship between providing an attractive investment climate that will attract investment, and that to have this attractive investment climate, you need to enthrone a regime of law and order. You need to have a well thought through and stable policy environment, and that we need to have all those kinds of things that will attract people to prefer to make investment in our environment. Investment brings resources. Resources create businesses. Businesses create jobs. Jobs create wealth. Wealth drives away poverty. Sir, the truth of the matter is that we are going around in a circle, sometimes one step forward, many times, many steps back. When Dr. Hewer is recounting what he saw or what he saw through, has it changed many years after? Is there a change? We're still in the same circles of going forward and backwards, and having people who have no understanding or how things are done taking decisions. In the case of the industry you want me to specifically talk about, all of a sudden a minister of health came called Professor Liko Ransom, and I'm going to be calling names because I have no time to be running around the subject. Oliko has come out of his own personal fancies without proper consultation and his own socialist background. He decided that if your product was not on the essential drug list, your drug was fake and therefore illegitimate. WHO that designed the essential drug list designed it as a specific number of medicines that are commonly used, that affect the generality of the people, which the public sector must always have in its institutions for the good of the people. But one man working with also an uninformed leadership as his principal got together and issued a decree that said if you didn't have products on the essential drug list, your drugs were fake. I was running a multinational company then, Pfizer, and most of our products were branded. We had moved from making essential medicines, so to say, to making innovative products that treated illnesses at different levels, not making just simple analgesics, anti-malarials, and those simple antibiotics that belong to the essential drug list. So all of a sudden, we didn't have business. I didn't have business. My business was gone. So were also many other multinationals that are invested money in research and development, developing new moieties for treating diseases present and emergent. That is what the pharmaceutical industry does. It lives on innovation, on creativity. It anticipates, it's studying the future, the mutation of microbes. It's looking at pathophysiology, looking at pathology, disease creation, and going ahead. It takes a minimum of 12 to 15 years to bring a drug from conception in the lab to the market. And between that, you've spent $400 to $500 million. If you're lucky, out of 10, you have one product that makes it to the market, you've done well. So, and this was a terrible policy. And what did we do? We rose up in arms because all of a sudden we had no business doing. And we began to run around the Essential Drug List Committee and all the people involved, first to begin to amend the Essential Drug List. So first, products that first didn't belong to the Essential Drug List into the list so that we could survive. And continue to push. Olikoye wouldn't budge. And there was just nobody else to listen, not the military, until Julius Adelu came to office and we put our case. And within 6 months, he was Secretary of Health. He changed that policy. But before then, multinationals have made their decisions to exit, to pull off, to reduce their investment, to stop employment, to stop development. And that was the genesis of the decline of the industry. And we went back, instead of building local capacity, we went back to importing finished goods from China, from Asia, from Malaysia, from India, from everywhere. The problem part is that we need to get people who understand the interaction between
these things. That doesn't go to the point about institutions and how institutions are important to set boundaries to conduct. Now, I spent a lot of time studying that crisis, as you know very well. I wrote case studies on it. Just to explain it a little better to some people, you are talking as the insider. The World Health Organization brought out a minimum list of the kinds of drugs government hospitals can hold, which were essentially the cheapest generics, so that government's resources could be efficiently used. If Panadol will make headache go away in 5 minutes, and some generic paracetamol can make it go in 10 minutes, it will go. So if you want to buy the better, the more expensive one, you can use your money, go and buy. But if you come to government hospital, they will give you paracetamol. So it was supposed to be that. But the minister, being a, well, you use socialist, a socialistic kind of person, thought, okay, no, we want to give people the cheapest kinds of drugs. And because he had very little understanding of the whole investment pipeline and industry and all of that, that decision to make the essential drug list a maximum rather than a minimum completely destroyed the Nigerian pharmaceutical industry. And I think people don't still fully understand the consequence of those kinds of choices. Just like the one that Felix Ohiwere has discussed with the malted barley challenge. Even more traumatic, I think, was in 1986, General Babangida was traveling to go and commission the Bendel feed and flour mills in Ewu.
That's right, I remember that.
And on his way, yes, he used his own pencil to add a line to the speech he was giving to read. And that line was that from the 1st of January 1987, the importation of wheat into the country was going to be banned. And that the industry should now go and grow its own wheat. Now, the original import substitution-based policy was you cannot import flour. You can bring in wheat and mill it into flour and then progressively see if you could then reduce it. But suddenly in August 1986, there was a ban on importation of wheat by January 1987. In effect, a death sentence on the factory he was commissioning that day in Ewu. Now, why I say this is, what is the root of these problems? Let's hear from Dr. Remi Aribisala, then I'll give a perspective of how interests, private and otherwise, damage national policy, because we have weak institutions, which is what has led the Nigerian economy to being described as a recursive economy. 2 steps forwards, 4 steps backwards. You know, Dr. Aribisala, perhaps we can profit from your broad experience in this area as to why government made all the effort to set up the Raw Materials Research and Development Council to help create a recognition of the founder endowments we have as a country, and how processing of these endowments could create the raw materials for industry that is rooted in domestic production. Please, your perspective. Okay, unmute, please unmute yourself, Dr. Aribisala. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, welcome. It's good to see you.
And good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma.
Okay, I'm seeing Dr. Ali. Ali and later became Federal Permanent Secretary. Well, it's interesting, you know, what for. Say it's going to almost 20 years, 27 years I left raw material. And sometimes when I look back, it's amazing at the type of deterioration. But let me address the issue. I mean, there is no doubt we are endowed. in this nation. And we all know that. So it's not for us to start saying, oh, we grew up with groundnut pig, we had cocoa, we had this, we had that. But I must say something about the Nigerian breweries. When I was in ECOWAS, that actually was a feat. And almost all the African breweries borrowed from that, what I would call the feat of Nigerian breweries. And up to today, the credit still goes to Nigerian breweries. So there's also something to do, not only with government alone, but also with whoever is the head of the organization in that particular sector. I must say, sometimes the way government reason could not be explained by a technocrat. I happen to be a technocrat. I was in science and tech doing my research, and then the manufacturer, after the experience of the flour mill you mentioned, went to government during General Babangida's regime and requested for the establishment of a body that will look into such conflicts in policies of government, that will look into inconsistencies in government policy, and also that will look into, that was the peak of the structural adjustment program that was called SAP. And that was actually the period that the industries were worst hit. So the industries, of course, used their own various platforms and got a memo into the, then it wasn't executive. I think it was AFRCN. That was the highest ruling body, because we were a military regime for almost maybe four of the various government. So, of course, after the memo was approved, there was no name to the organization. Government then decided that to locate that organization into Ministry of Science and Technology, because their belief then in 1987 was that it was a research and development challenge. That was their own understanding of what was happening then. So I woke up one day, maybe, and I was just called by the minister, Professor Movon, and he said, oh, I'm deploying you. This is the decree. And I only had decree, no office, nothing, no name for the organization, no provision made for money, nothing. So such an organization that all that was extracted was the cry of the manufacturers, the Manufacturing Association. The access to foreign exchange created some problem. But being that the situation the country found itself there, I believe with the effective participation, because when we gave the organization a name, we had Chief Wayan with us, and we had all the gurus of the manufacturing industries. We call them the real sectors. So we had Dr. Iwere, Dr. Shonekon, we have the Labour Brothers. So with those ones, we were able to find our feet. Within, I would say, we were established December 1987 after the fly incident. And I would say by March, we were settled. And we set up these 10 multidisciplinary task forces, one for each sector. And we worked night and day with man to understudy the challenges, because we were technocrats, we were in the laboratory, and we were just pulled out and brought into solving a problem that was not only national, but was regional. So as far as policies were concerned, even with appointment of chief executive, you can just see your name being read in the newspaper. You knew those just country type of governance. But unfortunately, even in democratic government, that same style that existed then still existed. But I would say that there were some advisors that I would say understood maybe advising God. I think there was this Dr. Dotun, I've forgotten his surname, University of Ibadan. But there were quite some few people.
Dr. Phillips.
Some of the reasons why policies are revisited. When the policies, the measures, the strategic measures, the action plan are derived from objectives. What objectives are faulty? Foundation is faulty. What can the righteous do? Once
Yes, okay. I think we're having some slight network challenge there, but just to take that point that is being made down the. Okay, unmute, maybe you can come through. Dr. Ibisala, if you're mute, maybe you can come through. But, you know,
okay. On the, let me say on the import substitution, whether it was fluked, it was for beer. That's the sorghum malt. And up to today, the African breweries are still using that same technology. It may not work for the other sector. Maybe for flour mill, it did not work. But I was also on the tariff. There was a tariff review board. And sometimes tariff review board, you find out that measures are taken out of personal interest. Like, let's take the example of cement. You know, we had this issue of Gibson, which was in Nigeria. It hasn't gotten to the stage that Gibson could substitute the imported Gibson. But for some reason, that decision was made. And I would say that the resilience of the manufacturers at that time and their determination, especially the multinational, you know, sustained the manufacturing sector. But with policies, I believe it's an African disease for policies to just be, I would say, I don't know what, well, Dr. Iwere used somersault. I don't really know. All I know is that even for me, sometimes I look at raw material and I look at the progress that was made the first 5 years. And I wonder, where is that progress? What erased the progress? Why are we moving in the circle?
Exactly.
Well, I can tell you a few things that I think may have happened. I go back to the example of flour. There is a sense in which private interests affect policy in a way that is so detrimental to the national interest that we need strong institutions to prevent a policymaker from making a decision which in the short-term thinking of that policymaker, you know, can do more damage without his really knowing how much damage he's doing. Like I said, back like 30 years ago, I tried to write case studies on most of these problems and researched, investigated deeply, almost all of them. I spent time with the late Chief Pagbemi talking about the flour mills one. And then I wrote this case study. And the day that I was going to teach that case for the first time, I invited the then managing director of Flour Mills of Nigeria, the late Tunde Amosu. And we had a very interesting conversation. It was a class of chief executives on what could have happened, looking at vertical integration, the George Kumantaru's interests, vertically speaking, affect the ability to see this or that. When we finished the conversation, Tunde Amosu said, you know, really nice, very brilliant. There's just one small thing that's missing. I said, in his knowledge, you know, these waivers that we have, that people who have access to power can get a waiver and bring in something that is banned. He said that some powerful persons were approached by some of their friends that they wanted a waiver to bring in flour into the country. And their powerful friends said, not a problem. You can ship your flour before you get into Nigerian waters, we'll get you the waiver. And that the news then hit the flour milling industry, who protested very strongly to the then head of state. And the then head of state issued a stout order that if any waiver were granted on that, there will be trouble. So these powerful persons, their shipload of flour got to the edge of Nigerian waters, waited for the waiver. It could not be issued, and then it went back. Well, a change of government took place, and those powerful persons were now in authority. And that policy change was to punish them for sabotaging that interest. Now, I don't know the truth of anything about that, but this is a perception of some powerful personal interest and how it affected general policy. Same thing, even with the malted barley thing, powerful interests invested in stockpiling malted barley, even abroad, wanted to bring them in and began to put pressure. And at some point, after so much had been invested by the local industry, government seemed to have succumbed and changed policy. And even more interesting, one particular example that I know of regarding vegetable oil, in which chap was playing squash with the Minister of Industries, who was a friend of mine, and said to that Minister of Industries, look, you're going to have a riot in this country if you can't bring in vegetable oil in the name of protecting these local producers. People are getting ready to riot. And the minister says, what? The next day, he walks into the office of the president or head of state and says, we're going to have riots. We better remove this ban on bringing in vegetable oil. And they removed the ban. And the man who was playing squash with him already had a shipload of vegetable oil ready to enter the country's waters. As soon as they entered, the industry began to scream bloody murder. And they banned the thing again. But he had brought in a few shiploads of vegetable oil and he made out like a bandit. Now, how can we create a country that stops behaving like this? And my academic research, everything says to me that the only thing you do is build institutions. One of the best writings on that subject, the 1990 book by Douglas North, essentially says that it is interested parties, the manufacturers themselves, in getting together and putting pressure on the system that you then get boundaries set. Why were we not successful as manufacturers in pushing enough for those boundaries to be set? Elahiwere, I want to start this with all the meetings, and I attended lots of them. I was then on the National Council of Man, I was on the Council of NECA, I was on the Council of Lagos Chamber of Commerce. Why did the manufacturing sector fail to have that impact of ensuring a level playing field. One of the big issues, by the way, that Engineer Charles Ugu raised last week, which affected all of us, was the structural adjustment program and banking.
Now, can I? Okay, let me just try to say a few words on that. And I'll start by telling you a story. At one stage, I remember that the organized private sector was agitated for a particular thing to happen. I was involved in the case made by the private sector. And on one occasion, I happened to have a one-to-one discussion with the number 2, the vice president. And he said to me, I can't understand you people. He said, you come here as a body, you make a case for something to happen, we try and reason it out with you. Say, in the night,
some of you will come
back to us.
Yes.
And change the situation. I mean, I was so disarmed. I was so embarrassed. And he said, yes, you see, people like this, you are that, you come here. All these changes you are seeing are caused by your people. So we need unity. We need a sense of purpose. Where are we actually going? Unless we speak with one voice, unless we're united in pursuing a cause, our chances of success are low. We are our worst enemies. I tell you, you see, one of this person to me said, look, you say manufacturers, you say one thing, the commerce and industry say another thing. Then you come together, you tell us one story, and then we reason with. And he said, do you know what? He said the pressures they have at night is much more than the pressures we pile of them in the day. So he blamed us for the inconsistency, not the government. So what I'm now saying is this: look, we need to have a sense of purpose. As even the private sector, are we united? What do we want? If we're united and we pursue what we want dedicatedly and together and put on a common front, we succeed. This question of the trader doing one thing, manufacturers doing another thing, and then you know what happens at night. Yes. We must stop that. That has to come to an end. We must. You talk of this. You talk of these institutions. The strength of the institutions depends very much on their integrity. Once the integrity is faulted, then of course the whole thing falls apart. And what I'm saying now to you is that that integrity has been faulted on many occasions by the people themselves who say one thing and then go behind to say something very different. That's what first we need to kill. So that I'm saying, in fact, that you see that we should be more open to ourselves as a private sector and put all our cards on the table so that when they are being considered as a private sector, it will be holistic consideration and the decision taking will be binding on everybody concerned.
Yes, but sometimes the interests of members of the private sector can vary. A classic example is foreign exchange management. For a long time, foreign exchange was being allocated in Nigeria, and it became a cesspit of corruption. And those who were willing to give got more, and the excuse was that, it's for manufacturers so that they can create jobs, but manufacturers would not get the foreign exchange. It is some chiefs and some alajis who will get it at night and then go hawking into manufacturers the next day. And then we had a PPIB, Productivity Prices and Income Board, who did price control and
Yes.
will calculate the value based on the price of foreign exchange that the thing was allocated, but was allocated to the chief, who sold it to the manufacturer at 3 times the price. So you then had this strange scenario where if you sold the goods you produced at the price that PPIB said you should sell it, you would be essentially shutting your doors to business after a few weeks because you are giving away money with every good you sold.
So, yeah.
And so people had all kinds of dramatic things. My story from my Volkswagen days is that the price control price for a brand new vehicle, people paid 2 times as much for a used one in an open public bid. So the whole thing was a mess. But eventually, the private sector, the traders, as against the manufacturers, came to this general understanding that it is best to use a market to regulate the price. Now, once that was kind of agreed to, it seemed to work until Abacha came, and this whole idea of preferential allocation to manufacturers came up again. Now, I remember very well giving a talk at the first Harvard Business School Association of Nigeria budget seminar, just 48 hours after that policy was announced. And I said that day that manufacturers who think they are getting a preferential treatment will be surprised what will happen. I give them 6 months. Within 3 months, manufacturers were begging for non-preferential allocation because it went back to the old, I specifically because the president of MAN, and I was sitting on the National Council of MAN at the time, Alhaji Hassan Adamu, welcomed this announcement by the Abacha administration, and I said, I'm sorry to disagree with my president, but manufacturers will regret this. 3 months later, manufacturers are begging not to have preferential allocation. So human nature is clear. Why do we consistently?
Can I come in?
Important. Yes, sister. Yes. National policy is important, but there are issues.
Very interesting conversation, and I thank Elder Hiore for that exposition. But you see, this is where the point I keep making comes in. Do you have an intelligent state? Do you have capacity? Do you have vision that is being pursued consistently? If decisions were made based on knowledge, based on facts, it doesn't matter how many night visitors you have. The private sector cannot set that agenda. The government has already agreed. So why would I listen to night visitors and change policies that will be in the interest of the nation? This is the question we must ask. So it's not just domestic pressure. By the way, in Washington, you know there are lobbyists all over the place, lobbying for various interests. But the nation pursues a national agenda. If you ban wheat today in Nigeria, the Americans will be breathing over your neck. It's not just domestic. They want to sell wheat. If you ban XYZ, the Chinese will be breathing over your neck. So, but are you a government that says, this is in our national interest? Look at the very brilliant policy of backward integration in breweries. This is, you see, innovation is a leadership endeavor. By the way, leaving Nigerian breweries to even undertake that backward integration on their own was a mistake of government. The government should even intervene to help them. That's why we say a nation without a national system of innovation cannot make progress. Where you plug in actors and define their roles. You know, institutions have been created in this country. There are institutions. The truth of the matter is that these institutions are weak, weakly led. Look at the way we appoint board members that man these institutions. When I was in charge of national planning, a barely literate farmer was made the chairman of the governing board of NISA, Nigerian Institute of Social Economic Research, was being led. I couldn't sleep. I called the president that evening and I went to see him. And of course, we changed that chairman. But under that chairman, we are not less than 3 professors. So my point is, there is no substitute for a developmental state led by people who know what the thing means. You can have a meeting in the afternoon, agree on an agenda that is based on rigorous analysis that says, this is how we're going to proceed. People make investments in accordance with that decision. And then somebody comes, and that's why, that point I keep making about knowledge independence is so critical. What I mean by knowledge independence is you have called in your own people. If you go to Israel, if they have a headache, they go to Hebrew University and say, what is the Panadol for this headache? Because they have assembled mindful people who have knowledge that can create that. In this society, in this Nigeria, there is no center we go to say, this thing, how do we resolve it? Are there people that you must call in to say, it's not about people visiting me at night as head of state, and then with a stroke of pen, I change policy. I'm changing policy that affects the life of people, that affects whether we make progress or not. So
yeah, you are so right. However, there is a certain mediocritization of culture. In Nigeria, anybody can be anything.
No, but that's the point. So you have a system that's not based on merit. You see, we can't create something out of nothing. In fact, one politician told me that ability has become disability. So if you have ability, we put you on the side because we think you know too much. Less, as somebody said, how can we control this person? Pat, you know whom I'm talking about. So, why do you need to control somebody who knows? So the thing is, until you come, we keep talking about a nation. We have a country, but barely a nation. Let's be very factual. Nation building requires effort. Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia, when he was trying to put up a certain development plan, he said, no, this is a very brilliant development plan, but I must first create a cohesive nation. Exactly. The Chinese, the Malays, the Indians, we must all create one nation, diverse as we are, but we are going in one direction. So he set out to do that constructively, creatively, knowing that this plan will not work if there's no sense of nation. So I think it's important.
Can I say something to that?
Yes, please.
What he is saying in effect, which I believe is the core of our problem, there is no nationalistic approach to things. We don't think of Nigeria as a nation. We think most of the time of personal interests, sectional interests. You see, the founders of this nation, they were nationalists. Nigeria was in front of them. They were working for Nigeria, not for the East, not for the West, not for the North, not for the South. No. If you look at it, our independence drive was about a nationalistic thing for the nation. Although even in the course of it, there were divisions. But the truth of the matter is that, you see, we don't have this one Nigeria thing before us as it used to be. I remember as a young man, when I first went to the UK, I was proud to be a Nigerian. Everybody knew you as a Nigerian. When we started this tribal things that has come to just plague this nation, a disintegration setting that we didn't quite understand how deep it will go. That is what is plaguing us today. Nobody thinks of Nigeria. Everybody thinks either of himself, or of his tribe, or of his people. Until we build a set of leaders that look at Nigeria as one, that look at nation Nigeria, not where you come from, we will not move ahead the way we ought to move ahead.
Okay, now that we have seen the results.
Professor Pat, please.
Yes.
Professor Pat, I just,
yes, go ahead.
When we continue to identify the challenges, these challenges have not changed. All these things we are saying have remained. And I believe with this type, yes, the key issue is we are building leaders. What type of leaders? You know, their legacies. The power of legacy is what we want to harness. The power of legacy of Dr. Ohiwere. How can we make that power of legacy? How can we bring legacy back? Because if we continue to identify the wrongs, the right, we've seen that Nigerians who don't know the basic fact that, you know, the issue is what is in there for me, not what can I do for my nation. But even within that circumstance, within that situation, we have many generations, emerging leaders coming up. And I believe that is the main essence of what we are doing today. When we talk about this global value chain, you know, how are we going to be one of those nations that will get involved? You know, if we look at the percentages, we find out that Nigeria is very low. You know, backward into, what we are seeing, Nigeria is executing forward integration. That is our local, you know, developing our local resources. And we know without the backward integration and forward integration together, we will not be able to get to the international market. So I believe with this, America and some other nations may choose Silicon City, may choose all those high. We know our level, we know our endowment, we know what we have done in the past, what breweries did with sorghum. You know, how can we, regardless of government, you know, we have all the government's body, NIPC is there, promotion, we are recirculating the same people. Most of us either as board or in one capacity have served in most of these organizations. But we all know once you live there, you can't control. The person there may not even have vision. We've talked of Vision 2020. Which vision are we on? I don't even know. But I think what we want to do is the people, the CVL, should find a way. We have a task. That is the CVC integration, the structure for Nigeria. What are the policies? We know the policies can change. If the policies can change, what other measures can we look into to ensure that we benefit from the global value chain? Because if we continue to go back to all these things, you know.
Well, thank you very much. You're absolutely right. And the question that I was going to lead off on is that we have seen the result of all these things from the past. The simple result is that we have a population that is growing dramatically. The only way we can really provide quality jobs to these people is through the growth of manufacturing. Manufacturing has been in reverse, came from 13% of GDP to 3%, and sometimes we go to like 4 or 5% of GDP, and a time bomb is ticking. So, looking forward, recognizing these challenges of leadership and all of that, seeing that many people who thought that in being self-interested, they were gaining advantage for themselves. We have all lost. Whether those people who are gaining advantage for themselves, all of us have lost, whether they like it or not. They are poor. poorer than they should have been today. Even those who managed to accumulate millions, one funny devaluation, the whole thing is gone, and all of that. So self-interest makes more sense to think of the common good, because the best self-interest is located in the common good of all. What should now be our approach to reinventing manufacturing? Because we need to reinvent manufacturing. It's critical for the future of our country. How should we engage this process? We say that impulse substitution strategy, had we stayed properly with it, it could have gotten us somewhere. Had we adapted when the Asians were moving from impulse substitution industrialization to export-led industrialization, it could have done us good, but we are somewhere today. One of the approaches
Pat, have you been hacked? We are seeing adverts on the screen.
Yes. One of the approaches that we have proposed is to look at our factor endowments. The kind of work that they did at Raw Materials Research and Development Council was to identify Nigeria's endowments countrywide. And one of the brilliant outcomes of that work is that we know that every part of Nigeria has significant endowments. Is it possible to build industrial policy that is specific to particular endowments, and that those endowments then evolve around clusters, so that in certain geographic areas with particular endowments, national planning pushes for certain kind of industrial parks, focusing on endowments from that locale, and how industrial policy can support their building competitive global value chains from out of there. If this is a possible approach, what could we be doing to make that happen? How do we deal with the challenge of strategy with all the problems we've noted? Because to do nothing is to die. How do we do something in the face of these challenges we have seen moving forward?
How do you want us to start?
Okay.
Can I come in? Can I come in?
Yes, okay, yes, sorry, Sam. Yes.
Thank you, Pat.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you're moving to the future, as Mr. Salas suggested, because that's where we should be going, because we have been in this place for a very long time. As they used to say, we've been in one place, we should move forward. And in order to do it, but it is a sine qua non. It is what is going to make us move at all. Otherwise, if God keeps us alive, in another 10, 20 years, we are here discussing the same issue as we discussed in 1993, when Dr. Felix Oyiwe and the rest were leading us in an ESG. So my point is, we should focus a little bit more time on how do we create the leadership, a core leadership that will be able to understand these issues that you are raising and we're raising here. The Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria today, by the grace of God, and we have gone around the reception we have gotten is such that we don't understand what we are speaking about. They refer you from the governor to the commissioner, from the commissioner to the agency, from the agency back to the governor, and they are moving you left, center, up, back here. It will create a chain of suppliers will come. The distributors will give ancillary and supportive services, but they will insist that we pay for the land first. and then draw up. I mean, out of all of the states we have gone to, the place we've got the best reception so far is Ebonyi State. But to get an MOU out of Ebonyi State is a tough job, because the commissioner for industry will make his own input. The attorney general will change it and say, you can't do this, you want to sell off the state, you want to give up the state. And I have shouted, we have preached, we have spoken to them. This is a way to bring development to your state. It is you that should be cutting us. But because of our own decision to do something, instead of waiting, we are going to attract international investors. Give us the certificate of occupancy for the land, because without that, investors will not be interested. They say no, until we see the investors, then we shall give you the certificate of occupancy. Am I going to tell the investors, multinational pharmaceutical companies, to come first before they come, and we're told the governorship has changed, the commissioner has changed? But our critical problem is, if we can spend the whole day, week, speaking about how to force the kind of enlightened visionary leadership that understand the power of vision, that if we set vision where we want to go, and all of us can walk through there. Understanding of what to do is not the issue. I've given you an example of the industry. We've gone to Ebonyi, we've gone to Anambra, we've gone to Ogun State. We are going everywhere. We are trying to build something in Lagos.
Sam, come. I have an industrial park with a CFO in Edo State. We'll settle you there.
All right, you are coming soon, because we are looking for that. I mean, but this is the problem. We got a piece of land given to us by government in Lagos to build a distribution center. After we fill the place, it's in a rundown place that was Igomu or Amuwo. We fill it up, did the land reclamation, government reacquired it. We paid for 17 hectares. They have now given us a new place that is 12 hectares, 5 hectares done, and we start afresh. How can we build this country if we are running this country with people who have no understanding, who have nothing they are working forward to, or a vision they are leading to, which somebody is measuring us? Are we working according to what we agreed? That's why, I think that the time has come for those of us who think we understand what should be done to find a way to go and get it done, because we can be speaking about this till we expire. I thank God for the life of Dr. Felix Ohiwere, that he's still able to make contributions. And when I get to his age, I'm not sure I'll be able to make. If you call me, I'll not attend to this discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You make a very, very important point. Look, one of the biggest problems of Nigeria is property rights. If the property rights are not settled, then it will be hard to get investments coming. Governors are canceling CFOs every which way, every day. How can bona fide citizens put pressure on the system to make politicians realize that they are damaging the future of the country through how governors mismanage property rights or the CFO system? This is something we should be discussing, because who will invest in anything long-term? Look, in May of 2019, Forbes magazine published an article written by a guy called Raposa, and it talks about how Nigeria is Africa's money-losing machine, essentially focusing on the fact that all these problems make Nigeria almost a certain place to lose money. So if you are smart, the worst thing to do is to go into Nigeria to invest. How can we live with that? How can we pressure people who seek public life to recognize that they are damaging their country? I mean, this is a core part of this conversation. How do we do that as citizens? What do? We must do something. Otherwise, manufacturing cannot return. We can talk from now to eternity, because manufacturing involves long-term investment.
I would suggest that There's this Nigerian industrial revolution plan.
Need to do.
Sorry, Sam. Let's hear Dr. Ibisala for a minute. Yes.
There's this Nigerian industrial revolution plan, NIRP. I don't know how many of us have seen it. And it's a reform document. When the document, the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan, is called NIRP. And that plan was meant to help Nigeria be prepared for as a GVC country. You know. And the broad reform there is to improve Nigeria's competitiveness. So we are talking about a conducive environment, and which is very, very important. Yes. Because policy is one. If I'm not sure, I will not invest. I will not be a foreign investor that will come to a country.
Even a domestic investor, the same thing affects the domestic people who invest.
Government, I will have stroke and hypertension. It's okay, I will lose government job, but I don't want to lose the investment. I'd rather go to a country that is safe. And I believe those were issues that I must confess, I have not read the total industrial revolution plan, but I expected, since it was focused at incentives, this type of things we are now discussing is focused at Nigeria's competitiveness. I believe with those ones, especially for the agriculture sector, for the automotive, there is now an automotive policy. Professor, you remembered when Volkswagen and Peugeot were established, and they said they talked about transfer, technology transfer. The hopes of Nigerians were very, very high. It looked new. It was a new thing. What happened to those two companies of today? Must some of these things
government policy sabotages everything. That is the problem. How do we prevent ourselves from repeating those mistakes? I have said repeatedly, and I have no in saying that 60–70% of business failure in Nigeria is caused by government. Regulatory risk is the biggest risk of doing business in Nigeria. Where it is long-term kind of investment, where you need corporate strategy that essentially is that of commitment versus so-called flexibility strategy. It is even more so the case that we need the kind of industrial policy that we're talking about from government. We need certainty about property rights from government. We need certainty about security from government. How can these be procured? I mean, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group.
Pat, can I come in? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Like you said, it's easy for us to give up because, as you know, the problem has been that those who are in are entrenched. So it's difficult really to, if you like, unentrench them, if there's anything like that in English. But looking forward, there are a few things some of us have suggested. If you look at the National Economic Council, for instance, it's a good, that's why I said a lot of things have been thought through. It should be a good platform for economic formulation between federal government and states. This is an organ of the federal government situated under the national planning for coordinating state and federal, the National Economic Council. And so if you take the question you posed in terms of clusters in states and regions, this will be one place where a regular discussion of, rather than coming to say, how do we divide or share the excess crude account? It will be, how do we come to bake this cake? Every state, every local government has an endowment. Listen, if you cannot do it state by state, can you do region by region? Can each region come to the National Economic Council with a plan? We want to support XYZ industries based on our endowment. And federal government will incentivize. You know, the thing we will keep talking about the role of the federal government should not be how to distribute money, how to bail out states. It should be how to incentivize. How you come with an idea, you produce a certain amount of money, or we do certain policies together to make sure. And then there is monitoring. There are targets. It's not we have agreed and then we go to sleep. If we want to revive textile, there will be targets. There will be things the states will do. There are things the federal government will do. There are things the private sector, you know, coming together through the National Economic Council could be one avenue. And the point I made last time about coordination of institutions is also critical. When you set up raw materials, the Research and Development Council, NIPC, Nexim Bank, Bank of Industry, and there's no coordination. As you know, all of these institutions report to different ministries, different ministers. And so there's no fulcrum where these things are put together and say, no. We are really in the next 4 or 5 years thinking of mastering 5 of 6 of these major imports to see whether our people will begin to grow them and support them with research and knowledge that is critical. So you need that organizing frame somewhere where the states, because states must be challenged to become centers of prosperity. States cannot just be where they receive money and then do as they wish. No. Nobody is, you know, you talked about citizens. You know, poverty and democracy are not related. They are distant cousins, very, in fact, nephews or something. So, if as long as the citizens are weak, their economic situations are poor, they're going to be exploited. But that doesn't mean they don't need to be sensitized and organized, because sometimes citizens, we ourselves work against ourselves. So it's important that we can't emphasize the aspects of leadership. But in doing so, let's use the institutions that exist, just like I mentioned, the National Economic Council can be one of them.
But can I come in, Pat?
Yes, indeed.
Let me just.
I believe.
Let me give just.
Let us look at the world. Where have we seen dramatic changes? They have come from countries where the leader had a vision. Singapore is one. Malaysia is even Dubai. Every Nigeria runs to now. This is another. I remember when that place was a desert. The first time I went there for a meeting, there were only 4 good hotels. That's many years ago.
Yeah.
See what has happened. See what has happened in 30 years. You see, look, the whole thing rests on visionary leadership, where the leader has a divine purpose, as it were. In other words, he knows where he is going. You see, when that is there, all these other things can be galvanized and they move in the same direction as that vision. We have not, unfortunately, we have not had that leadership for a long time. We haven't.
That is the point, Dr.
This is the crux of the matter. Because visionary leadership. Look at the money. Look at Dubai here, next door to us, not far away. I knew when they had only 4 good hotels. See what Dubai.
I remember that time.
You go to Singapore, see what it has become.
Yeah.
But Why did it happen? It happened because of visionary leadership. Can I tell you one other thing? Do you know that the UAR, for instance, they came and borrowed our constitution here and they put it into practice there. And it's working for them. It's not working for us. That is the one we had before.
So maybe
so we if we have a leader who is visionary and who is almost also missionary, in other words, he has a vision, he's committed to it, and he wants to see it happen. People will follow.
Suppose we don't have that good luck. What was the option?
You see, if we do anything,
the option is to fuck it.
Let us look at it. Let us look at
it. I'll take a quick one. Sam, we'll take Sam for 1 second. Come. And then Dr. Funke Bolujoko has been indicating she wants to ask a question, but we'll come to her in a minute.
Thank you, Pat. Look, I'm sorry. Dr. Hiwere, although Hiwere has hit the nail. Listen, you know, Professor Wu talked about coordinating committee. A couple of years ago, National Economic Council agreed that we're going to switch off from analog to digital television and all sorts. Myself and a few people put money, borrowed money to invest in building a plan for making equipment for that switchover. For 8-10 years, they've been moving the switchover. We've set up, we borrowed money, we have even built some of the set-top boxes. We can't sell them, we can't give them to the market. We have a plant in Calabar at the free trade zone. We are paying money to bank, we are running debt, we are accumulating debt. Government is changing policy. Minister of Information and National Broadcasting Communication are changing, but they say we switch up today. Then after a while, they say we switch up next week. After a while, and people are impairing. Some people have closed, a few other people are invested. This will continue until we have the right core of leadership that has a national vision that says we are going somewhere and galvanizes us to move in that direction, setting the key performance indicators, as Professor Wu has said, a thematic area, each sector of the economy. If we do not do so,
but if we were, I'm trying to get back to this whole business of
see how we're going to come out of this, because right now what you see are people who do.
Yeah, sorry, you are breaking up there. You know, in the United States, the American Midwest that I'm very familiar with, that I lived in, there is ferocious competition amongst local governments to attract investors into the community. They actually have a funding system called TIFA funds, Tax Incentive Finance Authority. So you see local governments running around looking for manufacturers whose investments can turn around the whole area and offering them grants, offering them bank loans, security, and all kinds of things to invest in those areas. Perhaps if we decentralize a little more and states, instead of going to FAC account meetings, will be competing for how to bring resources to attract investors into there. And it happened before. That's why when Chibawolo started Ikeja Industrial Estate, Okpara quickly started Aba and Transamadi. As the Sadauna started Kakuri, and companies were being hustled. Your company, Sam, Pfizer, moved from Ikeja to Aba back in the 60s because of this competition of incentives. Is it not possible to return to that kind of regime? While you're thinking of this, let me invite Dr. Bolujoko to please ask her question.
Thank you very much, Saz and man, to my boss, Dr. Arabisala. Actually discussing these issues, the crux of the matter is, like Professor Utomi said, manufacturing's input into the GDP are falling from 13% to 3%. How do we go? Like you said, if we don't move forward with that, which is true as a country. But there's one key issue, in addition to what can we do? You've talked about the issue of the property rights, and Professor Ogbu talked about the issue of rebuilding or strengthening the institutions we have to become think tanks. The issue of of human resources, because all this manufacturing will be done not by robots, but by human beings. And Nigeria seems to have this knack of running down industries, particularly the MSMEs, that forms 90% of the industrial base of any country. So can the government introduce a referencing system so that when workers move from one company, if they ruin that, they know they can't succeed in any other place. But rather, what we currently have is many of the small and medium-scale industries have actually been run down by the workers because they can move from one setting to another setting. Because we don't have we do credit check. How do we do human resource check? So that when people get there, they get committed and help to build these industries. Is there a possibility for that we can have a human resource referencing system in Nigeria? Thank you.
But yes, thank you very much. But I think that's an area of entrepreneurial opportunity. Individuals can set up such a referencing system and make it available to companies and profit from doing it. You know,
okay.
It is possible that some government agency can be facilitative of that, but it might be even more effective when it's private sector driven. Just a thought. Dr. Ibisala.
Yes, please. I wanted to go back to the issue of the industrial clusters. It's tied to some of these things that was giving land, you know, are there special economic zones? And I looked at what China, in 1978, I led a team of entrepreneurs to China to look at their SME. And not, in fact, then it was not called clusters. They were like community industries or village industries. But now, we've now seen that China's success in transforming its economy was based on all those efforts of what now later translated into industrial clusters. And the way they did the industrial clusters depend on the particular type of market, the final product of the market. You have the third group. Let me start from those ones. They are the foreign investors. They are the multinational companies. And they gave them the induced clusters because they are active in electronics, they are active in automobiles. And for them, they have a higher level of incentive because they have higher risk. Then you still have the second group. Those are the technological and capital-intensive clusters of Chinese-owned farm. Why am I stressing Chinese-owned farm? In China, the dependence on government, maybe they've been disappointed. Maybe at a time they didn't have a visionary leader and they lost hope, just as we are now. And the Chinese decided to do things on their own. So we have this Chinese-owned farm and they are involved in more complex, the second group, they are involved in technological. It's also capital intensive, but it's different. So let's go back to 80% of the entrepreneurs. They are those small and medium enterprises that Dr. Bogunjoko spoke about. And they are revolved around traditional industrial clusters. So I would believe that there's something, you know, in America, you ask them, you always hear them talking about SBA. In all this, their money, they are now, they defended, yes, small business, because that's the backbone of the economy.
That's
and you
supposed to
could
be
see, because of this
I'm not sure what Asmidan does. You know, Asmidan, in Malaysia, they had a Smidan focused on the Bumiputra system to look at indigenous peoples and helping them along. That has been remarkably successful. Many years ago, I was traveling with Babashola Chinsman. If you remember him, he was the UNDP rep in Nigeria back like 30-something years ago. And Chinsman said to me that when the UN system decided to help with these clusters, starting incubation centers, Nigeria and China started together, I think one in Oshodi or somewhere like that, and then one in China. 3 years later, China had like 200 and something. Nigeria still had that same one, and it was in fact not making any progress. So we've got a problem. We need a developmental elite that is just focused on how to develop Nigeria. The bane of Nigeria has been politics, in my opinion. You know, the wrong people have gone into politics, and politics has become a way of life. And how to build a developmental state in that situation has become a real problem for our country. But that should not be a deterrence. What can we as citizens committed to a future for our children do to facilitate the growth of manufacturing? That's really the challenge.
You asked me a question. The question is, how can we create competitiveness among the constituents of the federating units, as it used to be, that led Pfizer to go from
Lagos to
Linkages. The issue is that it is the structure of our economy and our nation that is a major disincentive. When these governors have to go to, everybody has to go to Abuja and wait for oil money to be distributed. And therefore, there's no incentive for even to them to cut us. We'll bring foreign investors, they won't even have time to see them. So I think when people talk about restructuring Nigeria, they mean well, because if we do not get to the level where we can take away this hook that we are hooked on petrodollar, cheap money, the effort to be entrepreneurial and competitive in a manner that will produce results will not happen. If there is no monthly money coming from Abuja, governors, local government chairmen will wake up and look for how to survive. It's just the way it works. So the incentive right now is not in the right side. There's an incentive to be lazy and to just not do well. It's related to politics, but more importantly to restructuring. Can the civil society continue to push that we should restructure our country in a manner that will set the federating units free to seek their own independent opportunity? When you talk about ENDC, WNDC, all these examples you give, Pat, they happen at the time when the regions had autonomy and had the capacity to develop their markets, develop their products, and earn their income, and then paid part of it to the federal government. I think this restructuring is a very critical thing for an economic development point of view, remove politics from it. So I think that's one area citizens can put their voice. There's a lot of work going on there. Maybe we should do more about that. It will create greater competitiveness among the federating units.
I mean, if we want to put this in a sense of the urgency that it deserves, just look at the trends. In 2018, Nigeria spent $36 billion in imports. By 2019, that had jumped to $47 billion. In the meanwhile, the only source, well, not only, but significant source of the revenues for paying for this import bill, oil prices. Now they're rising, but they were down throughout last year, as we know. And even more importantly, we know that the projections, Total's projection is that 18 years from now, its crude oil reserves in Canada is written down to zero. It means that their projection is within the next 20 years, oil as a source of fossil fuels would have become completely of little value. How do we get this urgency to shift from revenues to production into the mindset of the Nigerian political class, administrative class, citizens? How do we do that? Because we're in a very desperate state here. Any thoughts from any of our?
Can you restate the last statement?
Oil.
Okay.
Is disappearing as a source of fuel energy. Total is projecting 18 years from now, they will have zero value for their crude oil holdings. That means in their projection, I mean, for a long time, it was about peak oil. The theory of it was peak oil. But we've now come to a point where a giant like Total, in doing its planning forward, believes that 18 years from now, oil will have come to zero value for it as a company. What this means really is that if we look next 20 years, we can discount oil as a source of those revenues. What happens if we have not become a producing country and we're still looking at sharing revenues?
Can I say a word, Pat?
Yes, please.
In this area that we're looking at, which we're looking at manufacturing and the rest of it, you see, it's not everything that we have done in the past that has been a failure. No, we have some successes. The area of backward integration did not fail. The approach was wrong. In the end, industry evolved a system they could survive on, which was the outgrower system. If oil is not there, what do we fall back on? It's not agriculture. We thrived on agriculture before. We need to revisit our agriculture. First and foremost is the question of food sufficiency. Second, producing raw materials for the industries that exist. And there are many areas where there are wonderful opportunities. Textiles, we're going to cotton before. You can still revisit that area. On the brewing side, we can continue with the system that was successful and make sure that we're more dependent on what we produce locally than what we import. There are other areas we can look at. The point is, what will take the place of oil in Nigeria? Agriculture is certainly one. That's an area where we have some experience. That's an area where we're developing expertise. That's an area where we have all the basic things to succeed. This is the time to revisit. This is the time to have a.
Yes, thank you very much. We're going to be closing.
Pat, can I make my own closing?
Yes.
You know, you are talking about Nigeria without oil.
Yes.
You also forgot that the fourth industrial revolution is knocking on our door.
It has started January 1.
So that's why I say it is knocking on our door. So even when we are discussing manufacturing, the manufacturing that we use, the so-called abundance of labor, the window is very small.
Right.
Because in the era of robotics and machine learning and artificial intelligence, I can tell you that a labor surplus-based manufacturing will not be very competitive in the next 15 years or so. The window we have is that the deployment of robotics and so on is still very expensive. But you know, as we advance in technology, the cost of using robotics will keep coming down. So there is no substitute to thinking, even though thinking is very hard. Meaning By now, we should be having a discussion. You know, in the Parliament of Finland, very interestingly, they have a committee on the future.
Future, absolutely.
It's not, that is on the future, a committee that actually says what happens in the build scenarios. If we have a competitor in this, or a competition in this, where do we go? What do we do? So by now, we should be having a serious discussion on Nigeria without oil. Yes, agriculture may be part of it, but it is not this type of agriculture where the government is saying everybody should go back to the land. No. Agriculture is science-led. In fact, it was the former Prime Minister of Israel who said agriculture is 95% science and 5% labor. So you need to go back and use institutions and knowledge to revolutionize agriculture so that the central theme we must emphasize. You see two things: accountability, productivity. For as long as our productivity is as low as it is, and that low productivity comes from lack of deployment of science, technology, and innovation, we will be where we are. But in order to deploy science, technology, and innovation, you need good leaders with vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're closing now. I don't know if any of the panelists want to say a quick 30-second round-up thing.
Yes,
Yes.
I would just want to say that, you see, there have been studies on the potentials for each country on GVC. We know that GVC has come to stay. And for Nigeria, the areas that have been specifically marked as areas of strength by UNIDO, I think CBN attended, and Bank of Industry, is the agricultural value chain, with emphasis on finance and science and technology. So I still believe, and the report, cassava is one of the products, cocoa and grains. So we are not going to agriculture of all the products, but we start with the ones that we already, it's like the ones we already have proven, like the grains. We'll go back. Is a consolidation of the gains of the past, not reinventing the wheels as to which of these particular crops. So beyond agriculture, of course, we know the next is manufacturing. And the pattern of Malaysia, of China, I think we need to look into those areas. So I believe those should be the priority when it comes to the potential. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sam, you are going to say? Okay.
To say that in all this, the critical issue is first that we have a present to deal with, and we have a future to deal with. And they say in the long run, we're all dead. Today, Nigeria is going through a great crisis, unemployment crisis, educational crisis. The crises are just too many. And for me, whatever that can be done to get more hands at work, to get more people productively engaged from our youths who should come out from the school with entrepreneurial teaching and ability to write business plans and transform them to realities, to a government that has a proper sense of understanding of what motivates investments and productivity. We need to use the opportunities we have as civil society to continue to push for that kind of understanding that to bridge this gap and excite some level of increased productivity and engagement of idle hands.
Yeah, thank you very much. Incidentally, an educator who's, played a very important role in planning education for years, has been raising her hands. So I'll ask Dr. Gladys Makoju to say.
Thank you, Pat. I'm not an expert in manufacturing. As you said, I'm into education. I wanted to raise an issue last week. That is, the institutions we have sufficiently positioned to satisfy Nigeria's manufacturing other sub-sectorial needs. And I was thinking in my mind, is there sufficient linkage, synergy between our higher institutions, tertiary institutions, and the needs of Nigeria in terms of manufacturing and Nigeria's projection for the future? I want to end that there. I can elaborate. Another thing I noticed in this discussion, I picked something from what Dr. Hiwere said. The brewery built a farm and planted maize. When the brewery wanted to harvest, the brewery could not harvest. I don't know if they could harvest up to half of what they planted. It's an issue of attitude and values. Dr. Osita Ogbu raised the issue of integrity. There are so many, and then the same Dr. Ohiwere used one term, I'm into strategic planning. If you do not plan holistically, then I think the plan will not be well executed. So in planning holistically, who are the stakeholders that should be there? Another thing I observed, I said to myself, Remi Aribisala, she was not selected to be where she was, not because she was lobbying at her time, because it was just like Biden did. Who is the best in this? Let me select such a person. I read that case again. I pick another case. When we look at the small scale industries, we've been concentrating on the larger scale ones, the conglomerates. What is killing them? Have we looked at the human resource, what it is doing? My husband runs a farm. He is in court with many of those who came. When did stealing become part of Nigerian culture? And you complain, they will say, oh, he's just taking his own. Did you steal to build that? We need to look at persons who have experienced this. Let me finally rest on this. The last one is that, I don't know if a part of the country is sleeping. 2 weeks ago or so, I saw on television mountains of cotton. And I was interested in using raw cotton for my production. So I assumed that being in the middle belt, my state will have cotton. I was already eyeing the state where that cotton was showcased. I tried my case this week, and they say even the Cotton Association is not functioning. Are we communicating sufficiently? Are the loans from all these big banks that support? Are even the incentives? Why should our cotton farms in our own part of where I come from be dormant and others are producing pyramids? We need to look at is development, if it is strategic, is it fairly distributed? Are the opportunities fairly distributed? Let me rest there. I have other issues.
That is really what the challenge is. And this is why subnational governments are going to be the most important drivers of a new ascendancy. That was what happened in the 50s and 60s. That's what's going to happen. Abuja will never be able to make development happen across the country. Even more importantly, and that's the point I'd like to close on, and Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is in the country, and this is an important message for the work that the WTO is doing. We need to be able to facilitate cross-border integration. A lot of the, agricultural produce that we need, a lot of the other manufactured, we need to. Dr. Wiri talked about an outgrower scheme. Not just in agriculture that outgrower schemes work well. Even in the development of the SME, part of the focus of next week's conversation is linkages into manufacturing. Big companies, there are linkages to small input producers and aggregation, even across national borders, which is what will drive into African trade and drive growth. I remember 30 years ago when textiles were still thriving in Nigeria, second biggest employer in the country after government. And the Cha Group, this Canadian Cha founder of the group, making a point at the conference we were at in France, that if, you know, given the strengths of different parts of the sub-region, those who are more endowed with cotton, those who are more endowed with power for production and this and that, if they could produce some things in Ghana, some things in Mali, some things in Nigeria, and bring them together, they will be much more efficient and much more competitive. I think the time is now to look at those kinds of production strategies and aggregation across borders to be able to compete at scale in global value chains. Let me thank a very distinguished panel so much for an enlightening conversation. The conversation continues a fortnight from now, still on manufacturing. And I hope you will all join us as we look for ways to revive this sector in Nigeria and let it have leadership for where we're going as a country. Thank you. Have a wonderful week. We appreciate all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Yes.
God bless you.
Thank you, sir.
Good. Let's go.
Oh, my, yes, singing.